I understand that because of the nature of LABIP and EFCA, we have been concerned here with probiotics. But what we're actually discussing are immune function, gut function, and so on, which is much broader than probiotics. So I don't know, maybe today or tomorrow there are other groups working in plant extracts or antioxidants discussing the same thing. Should we not team up with those people to at least try to see whether we have common grounds?
We have seen in the rulings about probiotics claims, that's for instance the characterization and identification. Well, that's a specific issue. We didn't hear too much about that today. Apparently that is not seen as a huge problem. I don't think so it is, but apparently also industry don't think. But it was one of the reasons why a couple of the claims were dismissed. So that's probably also one of the things that have to be covered, but that's specific probiotics. But for the health effect, I agree, we should team up with others.
I think for prebiotics, they are in the same area, maybe even a bit more complicated, because cause-effect relationship would be prebiotics having an impact on the gut microbiota. So that's a second indirect effect. But it would be good, I think, to at least share the experiences. And I've seen several claims where herbal substances and others are to be claimed for immune-mediated effects. They also have all been rejected, but all already on that the composition of the product is not well defined. So that there's even a bigger hurdle than for probiotics.
Then I think there were two suggestions, one by Eric and another one later on by Lorenzo, to relate a little bit to the same. Eric mentioned go to orphan diseases. Maybe then the hurdles are a little bit lower for investment. Lorenzo also suggested maybe you should not go too much into the preventive part, but also look at curative aspects of probiotics. How could you use that? Would that be a feasible approach? Of course, you define different target groups. Your approach in marketing will be different.
But maybe make it simple. I don't know how you all select a new car, but I do think that the first thing you do when you start thinking about a new car is your budget. Isn't that right? No, but seriously. So, because I like looking at expensive cars, but I know where my limit is. So there is a point where you say, okay, this is the range where I can look, and you should do the same. With pharma, this is not the case most of the time. So you should do the same. You should say, okay, what is my budget? And from your budget, you can then power your clinical trials. You say, okay, then I can only do 100 patients because that's about what I can spend. So I need a prevention, or I need a cure where I can power my experiments with 50 placebo and 50 Virum patients. And from there, you can then select your field. And from there, you can then select potential mechanisms of actions, and then look at the strains, and then go back. I mean, it's all nice to say I want to cure rotavirus, because I think it's the baby killer. It's really a very horrible disease. But we cannot afford a clinical trial in rotavirus the way we are organized. So that just won't work. So I do think that you start first with the power of your study. What can I afford? And then work backwards and stop doing lecto fantasy and go to reality in those things. As I said before, I think you should first say, what's the claim I want? Does that fit with the power of my study? Does that fit in my budget? Do I know a mechanism of action? If I don't, can I fantasize a mechanism of action? Is there enough data in the literature that I can make a putative, tentative mechanism of action? Because look at the vitamin D, that's completely tentative, but it's a receptor, it's a binding, could work. And then start from there. And I think if you make a list of that, and I would be very willing to help, but then you can just tick the box. And if you can't tick one of the boxes, that's it. Don't do it.
At the beginning, Professor Morelli talked about guidelines for the food that was established in 2003. We are in food. why can't we ask to have the same guidelines applied to this?
Feed. Yeah.
The guidelines of 2003 were for feed, for the use of probiotics in animal feeding, because the regulation came up in 1993, and it took 10 years to have the guidelines, but at the end they had the guidelines. So the regulation, the guidelines are present, but they are only for animal use. Not really, because also in that case there was a very strange story. You cannot apply for a probiotic for animals claiming that you are going to reduce diarrhea, for instance. They have to demonstrate that you increase the conversion index of feed. So if you reach these results because you have less diarrhea, it doesn't matter. You have not to write in the dossier. There are persons that have written this kind of dossier. For instance, I was the external reviewer of several of these dossiers, and the positive results were achieved simply because there were less piglets dead. And so if you put all together the results, you have the positive results because you have less piglets dead, and so the final result is positive. So the idea is to have the guidelines, but we cannot really on the guidelines already present for animal feeding.
Hello, I'm a journalist. I'm not sort of part of the food industry, but I've got a couple of questions about some of these recommendations. So you mentioned the word curative, and you see that as a possible way forward, but I mean, it is banned under EU legislation to claim that you can cure any disease. So I don't really understand quite where that's taking you. And to be honest, if you go back to characterization, as far as I could see from reading the EFSA opinions, most of the probiotics, I mean, all of them, I lost count, they failed because they weren't characterized. And I was expecting to hear a lot more about that today because I thought that was a big hurdle. But over lunch, I've been told by various people, oh, it's not such a big issue, just as you were saying. But could you kind of explain to the outer world, well, you know, why isn't it an issue? Why won't it be part of the recommendation? Because I think a lot of people would expect you to be more active on the characterization. Thank you.
I'm happy you bring that up because I feel very lonely here today beside Dr. Morelli, because I'm Professor Michael. I was also thinking that there would be more discussion, and that's the same thing warning on the global level, that at least in other parts of the world there's a tremendous industry interest about identification and new taxonomy. And we could cite last year FEM's microbiology meeting, Federation European in Gothenburg. That was a great theme. And Danone was there supporting that meeting. A number of other industries were not there. We have the type culture collection network in the world now, with the one in Gothenburg, but you have here in Ghent, for example, in Bern. That's a very, very big theme, and really small industries should really be interested, because it's not very nice in the future to have a misidentified strain, mislabeling, but some of the strains, I warn you now, in the Kasi, Paracasi, rhamnosus group, there is a big academic fight, I would say, what's about and they are very close. They are, what you say in Salmonella, very, very close, but still different. So that's much better than to use other things, that there could be very big difference in probiotic properties between strains, which are very close genetically in this huge family. We have the real expert in the world here, I think, Bruno Pott in France, and I could recommend our own book, the Molecular Biology of Lactic Acid Bacteria. That's the reason we put that book out, because there must be more interest also in industry to the quality control, the check, not mislabel, and also the high quality of living organisms dead, but also the big topic to come up today. What is the role of lysed bacteria with toll receptors? Now come up even lysed lactic acid bacteria with DNA. Some of them are down-regulating inflammation in IBD-like conditions, which you can study in animal models. So personally, I think this is very important in the future. I really think so.